So it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Emily May, who's got our ceramics and social media talk this, I guess it's still morning, isn't it? Emily is an emerging artist from Vancouver, Canada, and she's currently pursuing a BFA in ceramics at the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. In 2016, she won the Craft Council of British Columbia's Emerging Artist Award in Ceramics. While ceramics is her primary medium, she considers herself a multidisciplinary artist, and her practice includes work in sculpture, painting, film, performance, and collaborative work. Please join me in welcoming Emily.
Hi, I'm really short. Is that good? Okay, cool. Thanks, Naomi, for that lovely introduction. Before I begin my lecture, I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with Dr. Sandra Alfoldi, but my presenter notes are not on the small screen. Dr. Sandra Alfoldi really helped me with my research on this topic. It was in her primary research class that I was able to conduct all my research and be really supportive and have the courage to apply for this lecture. So I just wanted to give a little bit of a tribute to her because her passing was a great loss to craft scholarship and all of NASCAD. And then also I had to thank my other professor, Rory, who is just not here at the moment. Yeah, so let us begin. There will be a question period at the end. I've reserved maybe about 20 minutes, so I just ask that if you have questions for me, that you use that microphone and you just hold off until the end. Okay, so a little bit about me and some shameless promotion. As mentioned, I've been in ceramics for 4 years and I'm pursuing my BFA. Originally I wanted to be a painter, but I fell in love with ceramics for reasons that you guys all probably know and understand and also feel. So my perspective on the subject is that I am young, female, I'm in my mid-20s, I'm addicted to my phone, and so my reality is that I grew up with social media, but I realized that that's not necessarily everyone's reality, so that's why I wanted to know a little bit about the realm of social media and ceramics, which is what you guys all want to know. So, intentions behind the research. So I wanted to know about the correlation with ceramics and social media and really investigate what this field means. So with this lecture, I am presenting a neutral stance and just laying out the facts that I've gathered over time. And yeah, So how do we use social media as a tool? How does social media impact the studio? How are we, as a ceramics community and as individual artists, using social media perceived? Why is it important to be mindful? These are some of the questions I had. So if you were expecting this lecture to be about boosting your following or about specific marketing strategies, I am sorry, this is not the lecture for you, and I will not be offended if you want to leave. So my methodologies for this lecture, I gathered qualitative and quantitative data from primary and secondary sources. I wrote out my questions and I tried to find people within my own network and within social media who were willing to help answer some of the questions I had. I also listened to podcasts and read a couple of blog posts, and I looked at a few articles related to the topic that might not have necessarily been specific to it. So I'd like to thank these people that I interviewed. There were about 30 people that I've interviewed so far. I'm not sure if I'm going to continue my research in the future, but for now, this is my list. They are from all over the US and Canada, with a couple in Europe. There were about 8 in-person interviews and 12 phone calls, and 10 or so emails that I received. And these people were hobbyists, students, emerging artists, established artists. Okay, so let's just define definitions to make sure we're all on the same page. So the Ceramic Studio, as you all know, is a creative space where work is generated by professional and amateur artists working either alone or in groups. As for social media are interactive computer-mediated technologies that facilitate the creation of sharing information, ideas, career interests, and other forms of expression via virtual communities and networks. This definition would include websites, but for the purpose of my lecture, when I refer to social media, I'm going to be referring to the platforms mainly, and consider websites a separate thing, just due to the nature of how everyone discussed social media. All right, so I wanted to put an emphasis on Instagram, and I extracted some facts about Instagram, because there were a lot of comments about it, and between Instagram and Facebook, those were the most common social media platforms. So yeah, visual data is processed 60 times faster than text, which is probably why Instagram is so popular. I'm not going to read the rest of this, but if you want to take a picture so you have this information, I would recommend you do that now. Yeah, Instagram just really makes sense because we're a visual community. All right, it looks like everyone's taken their pictures. Okay, so general thoughts. There were a lot of general thoughts that I had before entering the research, like what was the ceramics community like before social media? And like, is it good to share our progress and like update constantly about what's going on in our studio, or should I like just share my final pieces? And do I need to like juxtapose these pictures in a certain way, or like, I don't know. And so there was a lot of pressure. And I was also wondering if a lot of you guys felt pressure through social media and the need to post constantly and stay active. So images are a very important part, as mentioned. And so everyone on social media, regardless of their medium, is fighting to be seen and heard and liked by an algorithm. So it's really good to keep that in mind, because a lot of people are doing the same thing, and you're basically fighting with that. People will also share about their personal life or other professions, and so now so many people are bombarded with images constantly, and this is both a good and a bad thing. because there are all these questions around it. So with regards to staying active on social media, some people think that they should post 1 to 3 times a day. But if you do the math, when I talk to someone who does this, that person spends maybe 30 minutes to an hour per post, and that is time out of your studio. So what should we do? On top of that, there are certain times to post that are more bang for your buck, even though social media is free, just due to the times that people are most likely to be on social media, which is typically like evenings and weekends and mornings. Yeah, and so like even now, galleries and museums and events like Insika have social media accounts, whereas in the past, the most information that you'd get would be through the mail from postcards, posters, catalogs, and those sorts of things. Whereas now, in addition to that, we also have social media, and people can communicate whatever they want. So, yeah. Does that make us better than these institutions? And will images potentially replace the institution? All right, so do you guys feel pressure to post on social media? Actually, back. So it's easy to go on social media and scroll for inspiration. Artists like to kind of post on other artists' social media for commenting and liking and having genuine comments to solicit more activity per post, which is a great way to boost your confidence and make friends within the community. It's easier to send direct messages and just have authentic communications that way, whereas in the past it might have been a little nerve-wracking to be like, this person's on this postcard and I really like their work, but I don't know how to contact them. So if you don't post, does that mean you're inactive? I don't think so. It's just that some people are really busy, and there is definitely like a pressure to be constantly active on social media, but if you're inactive, that does not mean you're not making work. Kurt Hammerly says that 92% of his Etsy traffic comes from Instagram, so it is a good highway for that. All right, so Elwin considers herself an anomaly. She has no social media presence, and she also has no website, but she does have gallerist representation. And so if you were kind of more shy about social media and constantly posting, that is an alternative, because for her, she believes that she doesn't need to use social media because that's what her gallerist is for. All right, so with audiences, most people start their followings, as you all know, with your friends and family, and people who are generally interested about this passion that you have and are supporting you and your work. And then eventually come along other makers and people in ceramic classes, and then you get customers, and then broader fields like interior designers, architects, plant lovers, food people. And so during this, you'll also get like a geographical expansion. And reasons for follower or friend fluctuation are still unknown, but do not take it personally. Artists will sometimes unfollow you based on my chats, just due to having too much personal content posted on your social media. But it is also important, according to other artists, that personal touch is really important to keep connections with your customers and other artists. So then without social media, some artists they get to know their audience because they get asked directly for images, so it's kind of interesting that way as well. Okay, so you can justify your price through educating your audience, and so that's really important. My instructor, Joan Bruneau, she said that seeing how much process and skill is involved, these accolades validate ceramics as a legitimate career rather than as a hobby, which is really nice. Okay, so social media for professional development. So when we think back to pressure, it can be really overwhelming, and like I myself don't have a cohesive body of work on social media, and so my questions are like, oh my God, should I even post because my work looks really different and I'm still discovering who I am as an artist? And I think that's really up to you, because on the flip side, I had a conversation with someone who became really viral for a trendy technique in ceramics, and they feel trapped. They feel trapped to only post about that specific thing, and they feel like I feel like they were saying that they felt like if they post about something else, they might lose followers or people and those connections, because they're now expected to meet that expectation of that trendy thing. I don't know how to. I'm sorry. I get a little easily distracted. So then, direct messaging is really good because it allows for idols to be mentors, and if you're an idol, for you to be a mentor. It's also good because you have social media, is also good because you have forums and groups, and those groups, such as give a cheer if you're part of Clay Buddies on Facebook. Groups like that, you can make connections so easily. Also, that was a really unexcited cheer. I'm just gonna call you out on that. Okay, so yeah, other times you can build anticipation for upcoming shows through your social media practice. And so these are all good things to keep in mind. So will social media replace institutions? That's the repetitive question. Is image more important than your actual work? Sarah Lindley said, understanding how you use images is really critical because anyone can post a photo on Instagram. And I feel like it is really important to be mindful about that. Okay, so opportunities. I'm just gonna take this opportunity to say my friend Robin on this slide creates really pretty earrings, and she is selling them at Ensika, and if you want some, you can go to her Instagram handle and send her a message. So opportunities like that allow people to really connect. Social media is opening doors for a lot of people because it's easier to keep track of announcements from galleries, residencies, and even your other fellow artists to see what they're doing. So if you're interested in their work or their ideas, you can just save it. And it's so easy. You can also be discovered by a bigger audience, which leads me to my next slide. I don't know who drew that comic, but it is really funny, and I wish I could credit that artist. I'll give you a moment. If you can't read it, the first thing says, "What do doctors pay with?" And it's a teacher, and the students are like, "With money." And then the teacher says, "And employees?" And then the students go, "Still money." And then the teacher asks, "What about artists?" And the students say, "Exposure." And then the teacher violently goes after them. So exposure is really good, but it does come with risks. Like, you have to weigh the pros and cons. Just like if you're applying for a grant, you want to make sure that the opportunities that are being brought to your attention are, you want to make sure that the opportunities that are being brought to your attention are related to what is going on in your practice. Otherwise, I was speaking with someone recently who, they make really like large sculptural pieces, but they're currently making a mouth, like a giant mouthpiece for a show, and it wasn't necessarily what that person wanted to do, but they agreed to it, so they're following through with it. But they are putting time away from what they want to achieve in their practice instead they're working on this like giant mouthpiece. Social media is becoming almost an expected platform for artists, and even with things like guest curating, it is good for exposure, but depending on what the restraints are, some places have really strict rules for how they want their accounts curated, whereas others might be more relaxed. So it's good to know these things before you agree. Okay, websites. So my next question is a website more or less important than social media? The pressure to have a website overall seems greater than social media because it is seen as something that's more formal. So a lot of people that I was talking to were like, "I'm so sorry, you're asking me for my website, but it's still under construction, or it needs work, or some other excuse that we all like kind of feel." And that's okay. It's just something that we are keeping in mind. So some artists also have websites and others don't. It just depends on what they wanted to do, whether they're using their website as a portfolio or they're strictly in social media to market and sell. So this quote summed it very nicely from that perspective that wanted, that is pro-website, and that there is a validity of the website that exists that doesn't exist in social media. There's still a sense of establishment when you have a website, just due to the fact that it's more formal. Okay, so common assumptions on social media. Artists are drawn to a professional feel when it comes to liking another artist. My instructor, Neil Forrest, who's sitting in the audience over there, he sometimes gets referred to as a potter, and it might be because the common perception of ceramics is what people see on social media, whereas he hasn't made pottery in a really long time. And potters are the largest groups of makers and represent the public perception of ceramics. It is sometimes so obvious when people are using social media to present their work. So it's just good to keep in mind what your goal is. So here's a quote from my other instructor, Elwin. She says that basically she's wary of social media because sometimes, especially with students, it presents such a limited, narrow perspective and feed for people, just because they're only seeing one kind of thing and they don't necessarily know what to look for. I have another student saying that sometimes it's really disheartening as a maker to see the most common stereotypes, and just wanting to break the mold and stuff is really intimidating because we have to make our own paths. Okay, the future of ceramics and its relation with social media. So many feel like the importance of social media is growing. The next generation of us are raised on the internet. Hootsuite had written that 59% of its US users are under 30, and 33% of them are between the ages of 30 and 49 years old. So that gives you a little bit of information. Also, being addicted to the phone, that joke kind of alludes to the fact that more people are looking at articles, more people are looking at articles online instead of publications like magazines because it's possibly more accessible. Okay, so the fact that people have made a choice to make something themselves rather than to just consume what's given by big suppliers, it leads to a whole new way of looking at things and potentially to a real political shift in how we deal with the world. So back to the idea of you can attach your handle to applications. It just makes us more accessible. I actually don't remember if I mentioned that idea. So the idea is you can attach your handle on a grant application or a show exhibition application, and jurors can just super quickly look you up on social media, which is good. But it is good to be wary about social media burnout. There have been studies on some bloggers who have experienced it, and we don't want to burn ourselves out because social media isn't even our primary focus. It's our work, it's ceramics. So if it takes 30 minutes to post, do what works for you. Some people pre-write drafts, and some people feel like it's inauthentic to pre-write drafts. But I think it's just a matter of whatever works. And then, are we dematerializing our own work? And are we maybe, I've been really guilty of giving a lot of detail shots to build hype for my own work, and is that bad? Am I giving away everything before the show? Okay, so in conclusion, I just wanted to summarize the points that I've said. So generally, people have a positive outlook. There's an increased amount of work that artists need to do compared to before because of new technology. Images are possibly more important than the actual piece. There's a wider audience, which is great. There's easier access to more knowledge, and possibly social media is replacing websites because it's easier to update as informal documentation. So we just have to think about the common assumptions and stuff that we put out. I also recommend, if you have a private Instagram account, I also recommend that you potentially separate your art to have a private Instagram account. So if you are more addicted, you can keep your work a little bit separate, or your personal life a little bit more separate from your work. So what I missed in this lecture is I missed the voices from galleries and museums and residencies. I also didn't get a chance to interview collectors who would have opinions about social media. Also, more established ceramic artists who aren't potters and also aren't really on social media. And then, yeah, I intentionally avoided too many political issues just because of the length of time that we have. So I would like to just point out my bibliography and say thank you all for listening. And do you have any questions for me? It's a long bibliography, I know. Yeah, I listened to a lot of podcasts and did a lot of interviews, and a lot of it came from the Potters Cast as well. If you haven't checked out the Potters Cast, it's great, and you should definitely have a listen. Hi.
Is this the question mic?
It is the question mic. Can you test that it's on?
Hello. Okay, it's on.
Perfect.
Awesome. Okay, so you kind of touched upon this earlier with, you briefly mentioned like fad art and kind of like FAD, and how you can feel kind of trapped, like if you get into that world of making that to kind of keep with your brand per se. So my question is like, what would you say the validity of fad art like that is in promoting ceramic art on social media? Because I see a lot of people kind of fall into the trap, like as a student, of viewing those things, and they get really excited, but then they kind of get stuck in that rut of, I'm going to do this thing that I've seen online that countless other people are doing, and they're not like super inspired to get past that. So like, does it help? Does it hurt, in your opinion?
Sorry, can you restate the question?
So, yeah, I kind of talk in circles. So, I just want to know your opinion on whether the influence of fad art online hurts or helps the community, especially the young community, in promoting ceramic art.
I think that if you're just establishing yourself and you don't necessarily know what is good out there, fad art definitely plays an influence because people get so excited about it. I wouldn't say it's good or bad, but there are other avenues in which you can explore, such as books and just going to your library. I feel like fads can be good. Like you could create a technique that could become a fad, but then yeah, it's good to stay mindful about what that does. And then just I lost my train of thought. It's good to stay mindful and just be.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. Overall, you said it was a positive impact. How many people were actually having success with the social media accounts that you interviewed? And also, at what frequency level do you think that you need to be responding or posting on social media in order to have that type of success? There's a concept in marketing called top-of-the-mind awareness, and were you able to decipher at what level you have to be existent or in front of people to create that top-of-the-mind awareness?
There is a point where you need to stay engaged in order to maintain your posts being seen. However, I didn't look too much at those specific marketing strategy points, just because what I wanted to focus on was the impact. However, I know that Kurt Hammerly is giving a talk about Instagram strategies, so that might be a good question for him.
And what level of success of the people that you interviewed were having success with social media? Was it 50%, 80%?
I'd have to look back at my numbers, but there were varying. I tried to get a cohesive amount of representation throughout my talk, if that makes sense.
Of the total group that you interviewed,
Yeah.
what percentage of them felt that social media they were having success with?
I didn't explicitly ask that question to them, so I don't want to speak on behalf of them. Then, thank you again for coming to my talk.